going to talk about results from 3 different projects that I've been working on at various times over the last 9 years since I left South Carolina. I'll begin with a little bit of background and then have a little time at the end, hopefully, to discuss some of these and to hear from all of you, get your questions, and I'd really like to also get your insights and thoughts on where we can take these next. Oops. So just to begin, you've all seen this chart, right? I think most of you at some point have seen this. We know childhood obesity rates tripled or came close to tripling up to around the year 2000 and then began leveling off in the early to mid 2000s, which is really good news and is the result of a lot of efforts by many of you here and many across the country. So, and even declining in some of the younger age groups. However, some of these trends may not be equally experienced across all segments of the population. Some have suggested maybe that there may even be SES disparities in the gains that we've seen. And a recent analysis by Frederick, Snellman, and Putman in 2014 identified a disparity among 12 to 17-year-olds for both those based on education disparities, but also income disparities, with gains being seen among, in terms of reductions of rates of obesity in these projection models for those with parents or caregivers with a BA or more, but with parents or caregivers with a high school degree or less, actually the trends appear to have continued upward, suggesting a growing socioeconomic gradient. And so important for us to consider as we move forward celebrating our gains in childhood obesity prevention, to not forget that there may be some groups not benefiting equally from our efforts. In their study, they noted that some of these disparities correspond to also a widening disparity between physical activity levels and reductions in overall calorie intake, with children in the lower SES groups not having as great a reduction in calories and also having actually an increase in sedentary, or not as much of an increase in physical activity. I'm going to focus a bit on the food side of the obesity spectrum and talk about snacking and family meals in relation to obesity risk. We know childhood obesity risk corresponds to shifts in children's dietary intake, including increases in snacking in general among U.S. preschoolers and others as well, all age groups. Snacking at all during the day steadily increased from about 76% of children to 99% of children by 2006, meaning 99% of children consumed at least one snack a day. These changes also corresponded to increases in frequency and increases in the overall size of snacks and the overall contribution of energy shifting from about 8% of daily energy to near 30%, 27% of daily energy coming from snacking, which is a pretty big increase. So both the number from 1.5 to almost 3 and the grams of snacks increasing. So kids are snacking more, they're snacking more often, and they're eating more snacks. Prevailing wisdom is that snacks are good, right? It's not all a bad thing. We want kids to eat snacks. Professional recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics or the USDA MyPlate provide guidance on healthy snacking, size, the amounts, the types of food. Federally funded programs like the Child Feeding Program and Head Start provide healthy snacks for children as part of an overall healthy diet. Recognizing that the snacking, the increased frequency, may be associated with reductions in obesity and improved diet. This analysis, published in Pediatrics in 2013, looked at 11 studies and 21 sub-studies across almost 19,000 children, aged 2 to 19, and demonstrated a reduction, odds ratio of 0.78 for children consuming in the highest quintile of snacking frequency versus the lowest quintile of snacking frequency. So kids who consumed the most snacks across these studies had a lower risk of obesity, or lower likelihood of obesity. Snacks also contribute a fair amount of the nutrients along with the calories, anywhere from 15 to 30% estimated, looking at USDA data and NHANES data published by the USDA. So snacks provide a decent proportion of daily micronutrient intake for children, but they also provide some things we don't want children to be consuming quite as much of, namely solid fats and added sugars. In this study by Piernis and published in Health Affairs in 2010. They demonstrated that snacking provided greater than 50% of, SOFAS provided greater than 50% of snack energy, and most of that came from desserts, salty snacks, sugar-sweetened beverages. So while nutrients are being provided, maybe other things that we don't want kids to be eating are being provided also. So when we're thinking about our interventions and how we can improve the quality of snacks, one of the first places we start to think about is where children are eating. So children are snacking more, the snacks are bigger, the snacks may or may not be healthy, but where are they eating these? Over the years, there have been shifts in the amount of meals and snacks eaten away from home. I personally, when I first saw this chart, I found it surprising. I would have expected children to be eating more away from home, but from 77 through 2006, there hasn't been a huge shift. Children still consume anywhere from two-thirds to three-quarters of their daily kilocalories eaten at home. So a large proportion of what they're getting is coming from the home environment, which means parents still have a pretty significant impact on what children eat and when and how much, which brings us to family meals. Family meals is another important eating episode that occurs in the home environment. We know regular family meals may reduce risk of childhood obesity, and that family meal frequency is associated with better diets and healthy development in children, but it's not a nice, neat, clean relationship. Having more doesn't always mean better outcomes for kids. Some of the factors that have been identified as being related to those positive benefits relate to interpersonal dynamics. With children in households where there are positive, measurable positive family and parent interpersonal dynamics being associated with reduced childhood obesity risk, but not all children derive benefits from family meals. And here we have another example of a possible socioeconomic gradient. For certain families, the benefits and the gains we're seeing may not be experienced by those families. So this is Newmark Stainzer and Fulgerson and her group published this paper in 2013 showing that family meal frequency over about a 10-year period from 1999 to 2000, it's not just frequency, this would be regular family meals greater than 5 times in the past week. In the higher economic groups, or the higher, I believe this is socioeconomic status groups, there's been a steady increase. More families reporting that they're consuming regular family meals. In the middle income groups, they're fairly level. But in this lower socioeconomic group, there was a significant reduction over that 10-year period in the number of families reporting regular family meals, which if you think about the relationships between frequency and all of the positive gains we've seen in leveling off the obesity epidemic, there's still a subset that are likely not benefiting from those gains and may actually even be getting worse. So what's going on with those families? A fair number of low-income families or low SES families are also food insecure. Not all, but some. As of 2015, that would comprise about 16 million U.S. households, including about 6.4 million children. And we know children in food insecure households tend to have poorer diet quality on average, and that family meal regularity is lower. But how does that relate to childhood obesity? This recent study by Ogden and her group looked at relationships between child food insecurity measured using the 18-item USDA measure and childhood obesity. And what they found was the household level was not associated with childhood obesity, but measures of personal food insecurity were among children aged 6 to 11. Those personal food insecurity items that are an additional 5 items added on to the 18-item questionnaire assess personal food security of the referent child and relate to specific behaviors, conditions, or actions of that reference child in response to food shortages. And affirmative responses to those items do appear to be associated with childhood obesity. So rather than it being a household influence, it's if you can measure it at the child level, there is a relationship. So what is going on with these behaviors, conditions, or actions in food insecure households that might predispose some children to poorer diets? I'm going to throw in here the idea of household chaos that I'll come back to later on. So thinking about what goes on in low-income households that are experiencing food insecurity, or low SES households experiencing food insecurity, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, they may be experiencing higher levels of chaos. Food insecure households do report higher levels of chaos in some surveys. It's defined as unpredictable, non-routine, inconsistent, and non-contingent physical and social surroundings. And this may disrupt children's snacks and meals above and beyond just having household food insecurity. So those dynamics, things may be happening in the household that really put children at higher risk. So kind of big picture, what do we know? We know home-based snacks and meals likely contribute to childhood obesity, either protective or may actually exacerbate. That snacks and family meal frequency might be protective, and these are the types of episodes most commonly consumed in the home environment. A lot of snacking, and then the family meal. Lunches are often consumed in a variety of different places as made breakfast. Among low-income families that are participating in school lunch programs, they may be getting those earlier calories from a different location. But we know not all snacks are healthy, and family meal experiences may vary, so frequency is not the only thing. Food insecure households experience more chaos and less family meal planning, but how might this affect child diet? And finally, personal food insecurity is associated with higher risk of childhood obesity, but not household level food insecurity, and why and how, or what are some of the mechanisms? So it's this basic understanding that is driving some of the work I've been involved with over the last 9 years. And I say our work collectively because the projects I'll present are collaborations with different groups of people, and we've sought to understand how caregivers in food insecure households and low-income households construct children's snacks and family meals, and how these constructions then shape the eating experiences for children that might influence their dietary intake and well-being related to obesity. So I'm going to talk first about a study that I have been working on over the last few years in collaboration with Kirsten Davison and Jenny Fisher. The overarching goal of this project was to develop an empirically driven definition of child snacking, its goals and feeding practices from low-income Hispanic American, white, and African American parents' perspectives. For me, this was one of those interesting projects. I got involved with them and began working collaboratively long distance. We worked for 2 years together, got our funding, and even began developing our instruments before we ever met. Everything was Skype. I'd seen their faces on Skype, but it was all virtual. And then we ran into each other at a conference, none of us knowing the others would be there. And we recognized each other, and it was a very fruitful, a lot of serendipity involved in that collaboration that is continuing. So this work the original work was really guided by schema theory, and that's how I got involved. They reached out to me, and I also had been in conversation with them about child feeding. We wanted to do something that looked at parents' perceptions of child snacks from a cognitive angle. And schemas are mental representations of concepts like child snacks that are constructed and shaped through experience. We know they vary in complexity across domains and across people. They may have concrete or abstract elements. They're clearly influenced by culture and upbringing and their dynamic and nature. When we do nutrition, learning theory. So learning theories that are based on schema theory tell us to meet the person where they are, to understand where they're coming from, the schema that they have, and then build from that. People don't enter or embark on a behavior change with no pre-existing cognitive representations of what that behavior might be. So applying that to snacking, we began by thinking about what is snacking. It's often self-defined in epidemiological diet studies. It could be, did you eat a snack? Asking a person to just say yes or no, I ate a snack. It might be related to time of day. It might take NDSR data or data from dietary recalls and say, well, if it wasn't labeled a meal, it must be a snack, or if it happened at this certain 3 o'clock or 10 o'clock, those are snacks. Could be the types of foods eaten. Is it a 100-calorie pack or an orange? That's a snack, whether the person calls it that or not. the context in which they're consumed, or even characteristics of the individual. If it's a child, it might be a snack. If that's or vice versa, a child, that might be a meal, but if an adult ate the same thing, it would be a snack. But it's really poorly understood from the parent perspective. These are all expert-derived, sort of we're defining them, ways of thinking about snacking. And parent snack schemas and practices likely play a strong role in child snacking behaviors. So we sought to gain an idea of what parents' snacking schemas were. We recruited 60 low-income parents of children aged 3 to 5 in Philadelphia and Boston. They were primarily mothers, 56 mothers and 4 fathers. Our goal, they had to have primary custody at least 50% of the time and be the primary food provider in the household. And they all had to be at or below the WIC eligibility level, so all of them were at or below 185% of the poverty level. They weren't all food insecure. About half were food insecure and half were not using the USDA 18-item measure. We spent about an hour with each participant. And I say 60 minutes, that was in our grant. I think they were more like an hour to an hour and a half. The interviews took a long time. They were in-depth with integrated card sort tasks that we audio taped and transcribed, and I promise I'd pass some of these out. We had a lot of fun making these cards over about a year period. You can feel them. They're really well designed and carefully thought out. We derived the dietary, we developed these cards using dietary intake data from a multi-ethnic sample of about 250 children. And we had a huge list of all the foods children consumed between snacks. And I need to thank Diane Ward, actually, her name's not on here. She provided us with a lot of the data that we used for the snacks, the dietary data. We had this huge list of foods, and we narrowed it down to those most commonly consumed by children outside of defined meal times. And then we chose 65 that varied in the solid fat and added sugar content, which you'll see why in a moment. And we included both foods and beverages, and because we were interviewing Spanish-speaking participants, we also included the Spanish name. And choosing the images and narrowing this down, we went through a long iterative process of making sure that the items we chose were recognizable to parents and would be appropriate for children. So the interview was a multi-step process. For those of you who saw my doctoral dissertation defense 11 years ago over there, this will look a little bit familiar because we used the same basic method that I used in my defense. We began very open-ended and asked parents to just define snack. When I say the word snack, what do you think of? And a series of questions following that. Then we handed them a full set of the 65 cards and said, can you sort these into 3 predefined categories? Snacks you would give your child, things that aren't snacks but you would give your child between a meal, and then things you wouldn't give your child at all, ever, between a meal or at all. We then asked a series of questions about those piles, and we set that aside and transitioned to the next part of the interview, and we asked them to tell us how you decide what snacks your child gets. Tell us the reasons, the purposes, the goals for snacking, and we wrote those down on Post-it notes and put them down as categories. So I give it because it's a reward, I give it to keep him quiet, I give it because he's hungry, and we laid those out and we gave them another deck of cards and asked, take this deck of cards and place each food with the reason that you would most likely give this food for that reason, knowing that you might give this food for multiple, but the one that best fits. And we asked a series of questions about the purposes for snacking, and then we asked about the contexts in which they snack. So tell us all the places your child eats snacks, and made the Post-it notes again, repeated the process with another set of cards. And throughout that, we probed and inquired about their feeding practices. How do you, for example, how do you respond when your child pesters or nags? Or if they said something about, well, my child begs for something, we use their language. Throughout these interviews, with the aim of understanding how they defined, what the reasons were, where they were given, and then how they were parenting. How did they actually even implement and sort of interact with their child? And finally, we did a frequency at the end, sorted the cards to get a sense for what foods were given more versus less often. So to analyze, we analyzed this data separately. The interview data, we did basic thematic coding using more of a constant comparative or a typical, just thematic. Not fully grounded theory, but thematic coding of definitions, purposes, context, and feeding practices. And as you'll see a little later, also a couple of other themes emerged. We went with those as well. We double coded. Anybody here has ever worked with Kirsten Davison? She is a very, very, very professional, rigorous, an analyst, researcher, and she helped us in this process to ensure that we really were interpreting the data properly. So we actually, I think we did a little overkill here. We triple coded in some cases interviews just to make sure. We had meetings. I flew up to Boston. We sat around and we went through these for about 6 months, more than 6 months, I think, just really trying to make sure that we were representing what they told us. For the card sort data, we managed those using Excel spreadsheets, and I mentioned before that we had used SOFIS values. And the SOFIS estimates, we used exemplar items from the USDA Food Patterns Equivalent database. And this was Jenny Fisher at Temple. She really led this part. We have one graduate student who spent a good deal of time at making sure that our average SOFIS values were representative of, say, foods in the snack chip category. So we had an average SOFIS value. For snack definitions, we compared foods classified as snack, outside meal, and not snack, and the average SOFIS value of foods included in those categories. And we did the same for the context and purpose labels. The context and purposes, we had to do a little bit of coding to group them into like categories, and we compared those results across racial ethnic groups. So for the next few slides, I'm not presenting every finding and every result through all the projects. We'd be here too long. So I've broken it down into 6 key findings across the 3 projects. The first 3 are related to this directly to the snacking project. So we found that not all foods children eat between meals are considered snacks by caregivers. We kind of already knew that. And this has implications for child dietary intake and obesity risk. For a snack definition, we wanted an operationalized, grounded definition, and this is what we came up with based on all that qualitative data and dimensions. And this, I think I have the citation up here. Nick Youngener, a doctoral student who recently finished, this was his analysis. And we identified it as a small portion of food that is given in between meals, frequently with an intention of reducing or preventing hunger until the next meal. That was the basic operational definition. But that definition had dimensions to it, and certain aspects and certain dimensions of that definition varied or took priority depending on the purpose and the reason for the snack. So obviously a snack would have a certain location. Some things eaten, say at the dinner table, parents said that's not a snack. If it's eaten at the table, it's a meal. But if it's eaten in front of the TV, even if it's like a hot dog and potato chips, that's a snack because it's in front of the TV. The purpose, satiety being one of the more common, the types of foods, healthfulness or drinks, portion size was essential. If it's too big, it isn't a snack. Even if it's eaten just like a snack might be, or it's a snack food. And then time, proximity to meals. If it's too close to a meal, it's part of the meal. Time of day, etc. And time to eat and prepare, it had to be quick. In looking at the SOFIS values, the foods, those cards that were put into the snack category on average had a lower SOFIS value than those put in the outside of meals category, in part because the ones outside of meals that weren't called snacks were things like hamburger, french fry, pizza, hot dog, foods that would really be meals, but they're eaten, say, at 4 o'clock, and dinner's not till 6, so no, that's a snack meal, or something else, we'll call that. We also noted that the nutritional quality of snacks varied by context and the purposes for which they are given. And here are all of the categories of contexts in which the parents said they gave their children snacks, with home obviously being the most obvious. These are preschool age kids. All of the kids got snacks at home. Out in a car, and they're in order of dominance. I don't want to say more common, but dominance. More people mention the ones on the left than the ones on the right. So being out and in a car was a really commonplace to give children snacks. Grandparents at school or daycare, other family and friends, those recreational activities, sporting events, or just going out to something that's more organized, soccer practice, Park outside, which was more free play. Doctors' offices came up among the African American and Hispanic families as being a really common place to have planned snacks, and then occasionally restaurants. We also noted, which this reassured us, that the card sorting was probably pretty accurate, because it makes sense in some ways. You'd have to certainly follow up to confirm that some of this is true, but snacks that were offered at daycare and school were identified as being those that are of the lowest SOFIS. Those things like the fruits and the vegetables weren't the things the parents would most likely give. It was what they got at school. Whereas those that were at the recreational activities and other family, these were the ones with the highest SOFIS value. And these also down here, the doctor and restaurant, but these were really small samples, so I didn't calculate the differences in there. But you'll see recreational activities. Any of you in here who've ever had kids who play soccer, who then get the snack, this is not a surprise to me. Because, and that for me, when my children were very young, was one of the things I thought, how can I fix this? The snacks given during these recreational activities, instead of like one little item, be this spread of Oreo cookies and chips and soft drinks and Gatorade, and my kids would walk away eating like 800 calories after they just ran around for 20 minutes. So that did not surprise me, and I had very little control over it. And just a little side note, so I started coaching soccer myself, and I brought the snacks myself, and the kids wouldn't eat the snacks I brought. I brought trail mix and grapes, and I had children, the most disappointed children you've ever seen, looked at what I brought and walked away. 7-year-old kids, they walked away, they wouldn't eat my snacks. So that's not surprising. So there are certain contexts where higher SOFIS snacks are probably more common. Now, purposes, these were the main reasons. I use reason, purpose, goal. I'm sort of conflating them all. They may be slightly different. We asked them, tell us the places or the reasons why you give snacks. The main one was child desire. It was purely, my child wants it, so I give it to him. Or a reward. He was good, so he gets this. A holdover, just to keep them between meals. And holdover and hunger thirst are very similar, but holdover was about prevention and hunger was about reaction. So they are hungry, I can see they're hungry, I'm going to give them a snack. Bribing or distracting. Anyone in here who's been around children or has children know you probably have done this, whether you know it's the good thing or not. You give your child a snack to keep them quiet so that you can finish whatever you're doing, like preparing your slides. Routine, social activities, health is as cited by some families. Well, I give it to him because I know it's healthy and he needs it. Special occasion and treat, and treat being distinct from all those other things, defined not just by the context but by the food itself. This is a treat. It's a snack, but it's also a treat. It's a special snack. And what foods are included in those categories? We calculated agreement of foods included, and there's no agreement. It was all over the place. It really depended on what the parents thought about snacking. So those with the highest SOFIS were those special occasion and treat, which makes sense, and the lowest SOFIS were those with routine and health, which when I talk about family meal construction and sort of what's going on in households later, this makes sense. So if you plan ahead and you're doing something for health, the child is more likely to have access to healthy food. So how can we help people be able to plan ahead? The third point, third kind of major finding here is parenting around child snacking includes strategies likely to influence risk of childhood obesity, but measures are lacking. Well, this was the main driver of doing this work. And we, in analyzing, looking across all of these interviews, we tried to pull out the parenting strategies people were using. How were parents approaching snacks? And we used more of an a priori coding approach with some open emergent coding, looking for themes that were unique, but using general or sort of the typical child feeding practice frameworks. And so we identified those that would fall in structure, coercive control, autonomy support, but then this permissiveness was really more unique to snacking than any of the others. And I'll go through each briefly. So with structure, parents' strategies fell into 5 categories around availability and accessibility of healthy snacks specifically, having some moderate snack rules and limits, talking sort of loose guidelines, not rigid but not absent. Monitoring and awareness. So if you ask these people using these kinds of strategies, said they kept track, they knew what their child had at daycare, they had an idea, and then the planning and routines. And one African American father of a 3-year-old boy says, like, I got him on a schedule so he knows he's going to get a snack at that time. So coercive control, there were 7 strategies that we identified in this category that we've grouped as coercive control. And these were snacks to reward behavior, which was actually fairly common. All sorts of rewarding with food going on. Snacks to manage behavior, which was different than reward. It was more sort of reactive to, if you do this, then I'll give you that, a bribe. Snacks to occupy the child, unilateral decision making, excessive monitoring, writing everything down, locking cupboards, which was restriction, and then pressuring children to eat, which was showed up a little, actually later on I'll say that dropped out later, but there were a couple parents that talked about pressuring what children they perceived to be not eating enough to eat more. So one African American mother of a 3-year-old girl said, I give it to him with no choice. Like, he has to eat these or he eats nothing at all. He gets no snack. Autonomy support strategies included 4. They were role modeling of healthy snacks, reasoning and support, child-centered provision, so responding to child's needs and desires, and praise and encouragement. So one Hispanic mother of a 4-year-old said, I'm trying to get her to eat broccoli. Like, I was starting to sit down with her, look, this is good, Mammy, here, look at Mommy eating it. So an example of the role modeling. And the last set of parenting practices involved permissiveness. And there were a fair number of parents using permissive strategies. I'm not quantifying it here because with only a sample of 60 and so few strategies, it didn't make sense to quantify, but we tried to pick those that were mentioned by at least 2 or 3 parents some of the time. So permissiveness, I will say, but in this category, all of these were mentioned consistently by a larger proportion, say greater than 10 or 15 parents. Things like no involvement at all, no snack rules or limits, context-driven provision or emotion-based feeding. So one white father of a 3-year-old boy said, oh, he's eating throughout the day. I mean, it's not like only certain times or anything. It's like when he wants a snack. I'll give him a snack. I don't ever want to deny him something, be mean to him, be the hateful father. So tied up with that sort of emotion-based feeding. So what are we doing with this? We've got this nice framework. We've got the paper published depicting this framework. We actually have been moving toward the development of a measure which is developed. The Parenting Around Child Snacking Questionnaire ended up with 20 themes, about 105 items to start with the 4 responses. We've gone through this full process here, the cognitive testing, the expert panel, and we've actually completed all of this, the factor, structure, reliability, and validity, with 3 projects in different sites around the country, and we're writing the paper now, which is probably in my inbox and others' inboxes, and we're hoping to submit that paper soon. And we've greatly reduced the number of items based on this psychometric testing, so we hope to have that available for people to use to assess relationships between parenting around snacking, and then obesity risk. So, summary around the child snacking. Not all foods given to children outside of meals are considered snacks. So if you ask a parent what kind of snacks they give your kid, you're not getting everything. Dietary assessment, that's important. That some things like energy-dense main courses or beverages may be completely skipped. Jenny Fisher has a nice paper about things that don't exist, like foods that don't exist. It's not a snack, and it's not a meal, so it's not food. It's just this other thing. SOFIS content varies by purpose and context, so it's not just about the where and the what you're giving, it's the why, and certain reasons correspond to snacks that tend to be higher in solid fats and added sugars. And that low-income caregivers' parenting practices for snacking do broadly align with some current child feeding measures, but there's some differences unique to snacking, in particular around permissiveness, but also in others. For example, praise and encouragement. Not too many parents were doing praise and encouragement, which I mentioned. So now I'd like to wrap up most of snacking and talk a bit about the work I've been doing with others, collaborative work around family meals in food insecure households. So I'm going to present findings from a couple of analyses, primarily led by Tiara Roseman, a doctoral student that's been working with me actually since 2009. She did her master's and then worked with me, and she's wrapping up. She's mostly done. This larger project was designed to understand how alterations of children's activities and feelings of shame associated with food insecurity might have altered activities and shame or in ways that result in adverse behavior, social interactions, and school performance. We actually, so you all know Ed. This was a collaborative effort with Ed, Jenny Bernal at Universidad Simón Bolívar, and Elizabeth Adams in Oregon, and myself. The work I'm focusing on here was specific to family meals. Tiara added on an extra component where she interviewed parents and children and just the South Carolina data. So she completed 20 parent-child dyad interviews. For anybody in here who's ever recruited parent-child dyads, you know that that was an arduous task. It's one thing to talk to a parent, it's another thing to get them to agree to also let you talk to the child and to schedule that with a low-income, busy household. So she was pretty amazing at being able to get that done. Children were between 9 and 15, and they were food insecure at screening. She interviewed the parents and children separately, and data were analyzed using a grounded theory approach. So just general, parents were about 42, kids on average 12 to 13. They were caregivers were primarily female, but our child sample was split between boys and girls. Primarily 85% were mothers, and they were also mostly non-Hispanic, Black. All were food insecure, about evenly split between very low food secure and low food secure. So from this work, we determined, Tiara and us working collaboratively, that the family meals were valued in food insecure households, but chaos is a major driver of structure, frequency, and quality. And this is where this idea of, we became interested in the idea of chaos, because within just a few interviews it became obvious we needed some kind of a framework to understand what was going on. So in terms of valuing, we asked this because some say, well, people don't care. Family meals don't matter, it's not important. And in our sample, it did matter. They were important, even if they may have lower, food insecure families may have family meals less frequent. These people said things like, in my head, that's what families do, they eat together. It just makes me feel good as a mom to know that at dinner time my boys sitting at the table, we eat together, they're not in the street. And even the children said things like, eating together is really important, because that's the time when like none of us are doing anything, we're all just sitting together talking with each other about what goes on in our lives. But this ideal, this valued family meals were often disrupted by household chaos. And we use the framework of turbulence and instability and disorder that's used to describe household chaos, but this list here, these are unique to this sample. So what did turbulence and instability look like in these households in relation to family meals specifically? There were things like food shortages induced chaos, the chaos of a food shortage, not having food. Conflicts with work and after school schedules, that's probably unique, not unique to low income families, but the capacity, well, obviously the capacity to deal with that may be challenged. Disruptions due to illness, both chronic and acute. Strategies for reducing poverty and improving food security status came up fairly often as chaos-inducing experiences, like having to work extra hours, but also seeking food assistance, having to go to the food pantry and wait in line and fill out the paperwork, even if you're already registered. Going through that process was induced chaos into the family system and affected family meals. Children visiting multiple homes, particularly when food was limited. Most of the families we talked to, the 20, they weren't coming home to one parent or even two parents or even just one parent. It would be a parent and an uncle or a grandparent, or the parent with the two stepkids from dad's down the street, the maternal grandma over here, the paternal grandpa, the stepbrother's grandpa. It was these systems where it was unclear sometimes where they were going to go day to day. And some of it was driven by food. And then disorder in these households involved inconsistent rules among different households or caregivers because of this sort of movement from house to house and person to person, and high levels of ambient noise, loud neighbors or arguing. One parent described her family meals in particular, but saying, basically, my day is like a fire. This was a good stereotypical statement. Others said it more wordy, but her day was like a fire. So how did they describe household chaos affecting their meals? I mentioned location and space and resources were impaired with some of the chaotic events, but also food quality. In terms of frequency was affected also because of food shortages, but then those conflicts in schedule, those obvious sort of relationships that we know between the chaotic household events and then ability to actually enact and carry out a family meal. One parent said, this was a child actually, usually the times when we don't get together for family meals is when mom is doing overtime or when we're kind of mad at each other for something. So I go eat in my room and then mom eats in the living room. But household chaos also was directly they described the chaos and the interactions in meals as being related to one another, where the chaos led them to feel disconnected during the family meal. They not wanting to eat together because of the food shortages, because sitting there eating made them uncomfortable when they didn't have enough. Arguments and complaints, low morale, and then sometimes that eating with different, sometimes unknown people introduced very uncomfortable interpersonal interactions or interactions within the meal. And so the importance of interpersonal relationships underlying the overall household in relation to the sort of how the household chaos might affect the within meal interactions became apparent. I mean, some of it's logical, but sometimes we have to ask people and actually write it down to take what's logical and make sense of it. So parents and caregiver, or parents and children, talked about both dysfunctional and strong. And the dysfunctional interpersonal relationships made things worse. So eating together, sometimes it reveals or reminds me of what some of our dysfunctions are and how we deal with each other and the kids and raise voices from frustration and stuff like that. But on the flip side, those families that talked about those strong interpersonal relationships with the important part of being a family, with communication being highly valued and this sort of strong sense of unity, was actually a way to escape some of the busyness and chaos. One father said, for me, at eating together, you get away from the cares of the world, You're getting away from the worries and the cares, and you just enjoy being with your family, with your wife and your children. And these are all food insecure households. Some talked about these idyllic, wonderful family meal experiences, others not so good. And it really hinged on the underlying interpersonal relationships. So chaos negatively impacted the family meal structure, frequency, and interactions. And the strong interpersonal relationships might buffer the negative impact on household chaos and family meal experience, which leads me, I'm going to go through this point. There's another one coming up in a second. I wanted to slip in TV viewing here. It doesn't fit perfectly. I'm going to deviate for a moment. But across both studies, television viewing while eating just kept coming up over and over again. So we did sub-analyses on television viewing for both snacking and family meals. And they serve many functions in food insecure households. In part, our focus in looking at this was because we could see that all of the viewing wasn't negative. It wasn't all having a negative impact. So why television viewing? So TV viewing while eating is associated with higher calorie intake. We all know this, right? Low diet quality, more sedentary hours. So we're told, turn off the TV, don't feed children snacks in front of TV, it makes sense. There's a lot of data to suggest that that's a good idea. We know TV viewing during meals, it might also disrupt bonding, but children who experience family meals with TV, they still have better outcomes for those with no TV at all. So we still want family meals, tell them turn off the TV, but in our qualitative, it didn't fit neatly this way, and qualitative data. So I'll describe a little bit of what I mean here. With snacking, 78% of our caregivers describe preschoolers snacking while viewing TV spontaneously. We didn't even ask about television. And they gave 4 reasons. One was involved with snacking because of TV. So this is the one we don't want. This is the one we say, don't give children snacks in front of TV because it's not based on hunger. I think they asked more for the junk foods because they see other kids eating a lot of it. You see it on a lot of TV and commercials, so they asked for it. But the others were related to more using the TV as a tool. And one was behavior management, allows parents time to cook, clean, work, or keep the child occupied. But again, this is non-nutritive. So another example of when we don't really want parents using TV, but it may keep children safe. And keeping her busy of more of sitting down, watching TV, like the popcorn, the waters, the hard pretzels, candy, and just to keep her busy. I mean, there's really no nutrition, but it keeps her occupied. I want to add on this point, I didn't pull in this data, but I worked on a paper with a colleague at USC, Rachel Davis. She had interviews from Hispanic families, and TV was also a major feature there. And one of the reasons in these, and I believe they were in Chicago, I don't remember the exact location, but these were low-income, urban Hispanic families with preschool children. They were a lot of the parents were using TV to teach the children English. Mm-hmm. So they had the TVs on and the snacks to keep the kids there. So we talk a little bit about that in our other paper. TV is used as a distraction to increase food intake. So for those picky eaters, I can get her to eat more healthy options when she's watching TV, because she's kind of distracted by that and not thinking of the candy bar that she probably would want. So actually a positive use of television, and then encouraging bonding and sharing food with parents and siblings. We tend to sometimes have snacks together, sit down, me and his brother, and just talk. And if we're watching a movie, we'll have a little bit of popcorn, so it's more like a bonding type of thing for us too. So the snacking in TV was mixed. Some of the reasons were positive, some not so positive, and we could see how some of these may actually be related to better nutrition outcomes if used for the right reasons. In terms of family meals, TV viewing during family meals was fairly common. 14 out of the 20 said this was a regular feature. We do watch TV with dinner. My husband, he's going to sit in front of the TV. So this parent was saying that that's not even negotiable. He'll leave if we don't turn it on. So it's on. Some had the no TV rule, because there was this idealized that we shouldn't do this, but no electronics at the table is supposed to be the rule. And I used to have a very solid rule about no, the TV was not on during mealtime, but since things have become so chaotic and people eating at different times, I kind of slacked up a bit. Parents describe TV viewing as either an enabler or a disruptor. So it was more presented as, here is a fact, we eat meals in front of the TV, and then they provided their qualitative evaluation of that. Was it a good thing or a bad thing? Those that talked about it as an enabler of communication said, we are family oriented, we watch a lot of TV together, we eat together, and we express ourselves. Another said everybody sort of sits around, we all enjoy it as a family. So it was a bonding experience. But others saw it as a disruptor. Said the only thing you're doing, you're not talking, you're not socializing, you're just kind of paying attention to that. So it was mixed. Some families it was a really positive thing, for others not so good. One child described television being actually a deliberate disruptor. And he said he preferred to eat family meals in front of the TV, and his reason was really pretty sad. He said the only other thing we do during family meals is we just sit there and eat and not talk whatsoever. We talk and awkward silence. That's really all that happens. I can't really describe how it feels. I'm stressed. I keep everything with the family meals except the arguing, because already it makes me really stressed. It adds to the stress I already have with school. So this very articulate 10-year-old described how he could use TV as a way to buffer some of that really negative, so whatever was going on in that household. And a very small number, but a few also talked about TV to distract from hunger. So I watch a lot of TV when we don't eat enough. So the family meal happened, but it was too small because it takes my mind off it, one girl said. So TV was a central feature of many snacks and family meals, but it served multiple functions, including keeping children occupied, getting them to eat more, and then really centered around that enabling of communication and socialization, or disrupting negative or stressful communication or feelings of hunger. So the use of TV during meals was actually much more rich and nuanced than we anticipated. And now I would include more questions about TV viewing and eating in future surveys. So the last point I would like to discuss kind of brings some of this together. I want to say this is developmental, this is in the early stages, so I'm presenting some preliminary findings here. We wanted to look at how we found household chaos is negatively associated with child diet, but some of the positive interactions might buffer some but not all of the negative effect. And this is based on, again, working with Tiara Roseman, my graduate student, but also Data collected by Michael Burke, who's now at USDA, in conjunction with a project led by Sonia Jones called the Midlands Family Study that was really centered on looking at food insecurity and what's going on in households in South Carolina. So from those two data sources, the 521 that Sonia collected as part of her Midlands Family Study, Mike Burke added on a supplement and took 179 of those families and recruited the children age 9 to 15, all food insecure families, and actually interviewed the children and got 24-hour recalls, child worry about food, and asked a series of questions about family meal experiences specifically. In Sonia's study, we had included measures of household chaos, food choice coping, and some other aspects. So the final sample ended up being about 100, actually not about, ended up being 132. So our children, again, were about 12, with parents about 40. And using that qualitative model, we had data on chaos. We used the Confusion Hubbub and Order Scale, called CHAOS, that she had used to assess chaos. I think that's the best acronym I've seen. Meal to assess structure, we had measures on meal planning, quick meals, convenience foods. We used measures from the ECLSK, items from ECLSK, to assess frequency. And then atmosphere of meals were from the FEES, food environment, I can't remember the acronym right now. And then television viewing during meals. We hypothesized that household chaos would negatively affect child's healthy eating index. And note here, there are no children in the good category. Our average HEI was about 52. About half of the kids fell below 50 in the bad, or was in the bad category, and then the definition of the category as needs improvement was the other half. We said household chaos would negatively affect child diet, but some of that would be mediated through aspects of the family meal. And the same with, we wanted to look at emotional relationship to food, how children were dealing emotionally with food insecurity. So we had the measure on worry about food. We used a multiple mediator model. We ended up with the mediators of atmosphere, television viewing, and use of convenience, but we dropped out family meal frequency. Wasn't associated with anything. It was not related to HEI. It was not related to worry. It didn't seem to matter, so we removed that. And meal planning as well. It could be that there wasn't enough meal planning happening. That wasn't a very common feature in our sample. And these preliminary results, these are standardized coefficients, because this was we did the logistic regression, but in the mediation model, we had a combination of OLS and logistics. So TRS standardized the coefficients. We found that household chaos had a direct impact on child healthy eating, but it wasn't mediated through family meals. So the chaos affected these aspects of family meals, but the relationship between the family meal and the child HEI, it didn't seem to, it was, the relationships went in the right direction, but they just weren't significant. However, child worry was mediated by the family meal experience. There wasn't a direct effect. We're still trying to figure out exactly why. We think it could be that household chaos affects the family meal more than child worry directly, so the relationship is actually all being captured up in this area, but the atmosphere during meals, television usage during meals, and use of convenience foods were significantly associated with children's worry about food. So what does this mean? Household chaos negatively affected children's dietary quality, but family meals didn't mediate this relationship. In part, it could be that family meals are happening so infrequently. There's so many other aspects of diet that are shaped by chaos that it's not the family meal. The diet's being shaped by the snacking and other things. And children in chaotic households are less likely to report worry about food when family meals include high quality interactions, less television during meals, and fewer convenience foods. So in summary, not all foods parents give between meals are snacks. The nutritional value of foods parents provide children between meals varies by context and purpose. That the parenting around child snacks includes those strategies that likely influence obesity risk, so we're working on that measure. Chaos matters. That chaos in households really has an impact on the whole household, including the dietary intake of children. And TV may not be tell the full story. And finally, the household chaos is associated with child diet and worry, and family meals may buffer some, but not all of this impact. So I'd like to open up discussion after with some of these points. I really feel interventions to reduce childhood obesity in these food insecure households probably need to look different than interventions in sort of non-food secure, more stable households. We all know that, but then how do we operationalize that? I think it requires an understanding and part of the construction, the cultural constructions, but also the situational, contextual constructions of snacks and meals across frequency, structure, frequency interactions. Frequency may be less important than, say, the purpose and the context for snacking, and then the household chaos and mealtime interactions at family meals. And that addressing household chaos in these food insecure households really should be foundational to any nutrition intervention in stressed populations that are experiencing food insecurity in particular. Thank you.